Recently, Russian military aircraft have put on quite a show in Ukrainian airspace, with 6 aircraft crashes occurring within 60 hours, averaging 2 crashes per day. The most unfortunate were the Su-34s, with 4 being shot down by Ukraine, 2 of which occurred on the same day. 2 Su-35s also didn't escape unscathed. The Su-34 is among Russia's most advanced fighter bombers, boasting high maneuverability, supersonic speed, all-weather capabilities, and dual engines and seats. Each costs a staggering $60 million, firmly establishing it as an aerial powerhouse. The Su-35 is even more formidable, touting as a fourth-and-a-half-generation single-seat fighter jet, with Russia boasting its superiority over the F-22, albeit at twice the price, $100 million per unit. From February 17th to 19th, these 6 aircraft met their demise, resulting in a direct loss of $440 million. Factoring in the costs of the pilot, Russia's losses are estimated to exceed $600 million. It is important to note that we're currently amidst a time of war, and Russia's endeavor to replenish these aircraft won't be easy. Even if they're willing to pay double the price, they likely won't be able to produce replacements. The ones responsible for downing Russian military aircraft are the superstars of the Ukrainian battlefield, the Patriot systems. Last year, the United States promised to deliver 5 sets to Ukraine, and this year they have arrived. Russia's hyped-up Zircon missiles, claimed to be unrivaled, find themselves defeated when faced with the Patriot system. Ukraine currently only possesses 3 or 4 Patriot systems, yet they've achieved such remarkable results. With 5 sets of the new version in place, what more could they accomplish? Russia's aerospace forces are likely feeling overwhelmed and defeated. The biggest challenge Ukraine currently faces is whether its logistical transport and rotation capabilities can keep pace. If they cannot, then the best course of action would be to concentrate forces and launch offensives in the eastern and Kherson directions. Other routes should be left unattended, allowing the enemy to advance. Once they're in, use long-range artillery to slowly wean them down, preventing the Russian forces from concentrating. This way, whether in the east or Kherson, the Ukrainian military will always find a breakthrough point. Remember back in September 2022, the masterpiece of Syrskyi's triumph victory at Izum was fundamentally due to the simultaneous Ukrainian offensive in Kherson. However, since the Battle of Bakhmut, the Ukrainian forces have been hesitant. In the Battle of Avdiivka from October to December last year, the Ukrainian forces also maintained offensives in Horivkorivka and Kolinchi. It's only since February that the offensives in these 2 places have halted, allowing the Russian military to quickly mobilize significant resources and troops to attack Avdiivka. Avdiivka, just 40 square kilometers in size, witnessed a fierce struggle between Russian and Ukrainian forces for 4 months. Russia emerged victorious, with over 40,000 casualties, throwing tanks, artillery, armored vehicles, and aircraft into the battle as if they were disposable, finally managing to capture Avdiivka. But what's the use of this broken place? The Ukrainian forces have fortified a new defensive line to the west, and the Russian aircraft have been grounded for 3 days. If the Russian military cannot quickly exploit the breakthrough at Avdiivka to further expand their gains, then the enormous cost they paid earlier may be wasted in vain. On February 17th, the Ukrainian army withdrew from Avdiivka, prompting Western countries to swiftly support Ukraine with weapons. The Biden administration is considering providing Ukraine with Army tactical missiles with a range of over 300 kilometers. This equipment is formidable, offering precision strikes covering the entire Crimea, causing headaches for Putin. Denmark also stepped up, providing all its artillery to aid Ukraine. The Danish Prime Minister called on European partners to take action and send air defense systems and ammunition to Ukraine. The Netherlands has confirmed plans to send 24 F-16 fighter jets. The Czech president has announced the preparation of 800,000 shells, which can be delivered within weeks. Although these changes may still be small and may not immediately reverse the situation on the battlefield, don't forget this is just the beginning. The ammunition supply at the Ukrainian front line can be described in one word: disastrous. Tank crews can only receive 10 to 28 shells each time they go to collect ammunition, which is barely enough for a few minutes of combat. Artillery units are even worse off, with many guns remaining silent due to insufficient ammunition and artillery crews being deployed as infantry. The ammunition situation for infantry isn't much better. Even U.S. President Biden himself has remarked that Ukrainian soldiers can only receive limited quantities of ammunition during combat. When the Ukrainian army retreated from Avdiivka, they left behind an English message on the wall: "We are not asking too much. We just need artillery shells and aviation. Rest we do ourselves." This poignant message, written in blood and tears, speaks volumes about the plight of Ukrainian soldiers. They spend 24 hours a day in trenches, enduring bombardment with empty ammunition crates. Despite their fervent patriotism, all they can do is cry out to the heavens, shedding tears on the battlefield. The Ukrainian soldiers who penned this slogan may not realize that in Western countries, especially the United States, weapons and ammunition are stockpiled in abundance. Just look at the deserts of Nevada, where retired aircraft bask in the sun, too numerous to count. The issue is not that Western countries lack the capacity to produce weapons, it's about the priorities of the policymakers in the White House. In plain terms, Americans want Ukraine to win, but they don't want them to win too decisively, nor do they want to provoke a nuclear crisis with Russia. So while they provide weapons to Ukraine, they carefully control the pace of escalation. At the end of 2022, the Ukrainian army had a chance to seize Crimea in one fell swoop. At that time, the Russian troops withdrew from the right bank of the Dnieper River. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny was contemplating what a rare opportunity it was. He proposed a direct advance to Melitopol to reclaim Crimea. But the Americans intervened, claiming the conditions were not ripe for Ukraine to strike. Not only that, they withheld armored vehicles and supplies, effectively stifling this decisive counteroffensive. Later, mainstream media investigations revealed that the reason behind the U.S. decision was Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons. Western leaders realized that if Ukrainian forces really pushed into Crimea, Russia might indeed resort to nuclear brinkmanship, so they had to restrain Zaluzhny from making any moves. Therefore, there has always been a paradox in the Ukraine issue. The closer the West gets to victory, the more likely Russia is to press that red button. So in reality, the United States doesn't actually want Ukraine to deliver a knockout blow to Russia on the battlefield. The line of nuclear war is one that Western elites will absolutely not cross. After all, Crimea is so important to Russia that even Putin's top opponent, Navalny, acknowledges it belongs to Russia. Stirring up trouble in this region could provoke Russia to an extreme extent, something nobody wants to test. On the streets of America, if you randomly stop 10 people and ask who they support, probably 9 out of 10 would say they support Ukraine. But if you ask them if they're willing to spend money to support Ukraine, probably more than 7 out of 10 would shake their heads. Why? Because Russia has nuclear weapons. Facing Russia head-on makes Americans uneasy. While Americans may verbally support Ukraine, when it comes to spending money, they hesitate a bit. The dilemma facing the U.S. government stems from this divergence in public opinion. But back in the day, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia solemnly guaranteed Ukraine's security and even signed agreements. In a gesture of goodwill, Ukraine destroyed its nuclear weapons. But what was the result? Russia turned around and stabbed Ukraine in the back. The American elites find themselves in a quandary. They have to fight, but not fighting is also not an option. Because if they dare to retreat on the Ukraine issue, the consequences would be much more severe than if they stand firm. The international prestige of the United States would be lost. How could they still maintain their status in the international community? Who would trust the United States in the future? The dominance of the dollar would likely be challenged, and its influence in the world would plummet. Allies would also start to question, can we still rely on the United States? Should we continue to align with it? Russia would undoubtedly become more arrogant and create more trouble. In the end, the United States may pay an even greater price. Therefore, in the end, the United States and the West will choose to continue fighting. After all, reputation is still important, and besides, Americans are not ones to back down easily. The opinion polls show that confidence in Ukraine winning the war is declining among Western populations, while concerns about the war are increasing. 64% of Germans believe Ukraine will lose, while only 28% believe Ukraine will win. A year ago, 20% of Germans thought Ukraine would win, while 17% thought Russia would win. But now, the number of people believing Ukraine will win has dropped to 14%, while those believing Russia will win has risen to 26%. In the United States, a survey shows that only 38% of Americans believe Ukraine will win, while 44% believe Russia will win. Most Germans believe that the war will ultimately end with neither side winning. So, will Ukraine win? The answer is, unless humanity reaches its end, Ukraine will inevitably win this war for national independence. History has always had astonishing similarities. Take the period from 1939 to 1941, for example. If there were opinion polls conducted in any country asking whether China could defeat Japan, probably only a few would have dared to bet on China winning. Actually, it is best to take opinion poll results with a grain of salt. If opinion polls could really predict the future, the stock market would rise every day, and wars wouldn't happen. In the long river of human history, wise individuals who can perceive the essence of issues and the trends of the time are rare. Most people mistake the part for the whole, unable to see the whole picture. Take the Russo-Ukrainian War, for example. Who would have thought before the war started that the Russian military would end up in this situation? At the time, various opinion polls indicated that the Russian military would swiftly resolve the conflict, but what happened? It's been 2 years now, and it's still ongoing. Every time a crisis erupts, economists confidently proclaim that the economic situation is looking bright, but what happens next? They're proven wrong shortly after. So, opinion polls are just a reference, not to be fully trusted. Amidst immense challenges, some countries have reached out to Ukraine, including Denmark. In terms of GDP contribution, aside from Estonia, Denmark is one of the most proactive countries in providing assistance to Ukraine. On February 18th, Denmark announced that it would provide all of its army artillery to Ukraine. It's important to note that artillery is the core of the army, and Denmark's move is akin to pulling out half of its own teeth. This announcement was made by the Danish Prime Minister at the 7th Ukraine luncheon held in Munich. She also urged other European countries to promptly provide air defense systems and ammunition to Ukraine. It must be said that Denmark's actions this time truly demonstrate unparalleled solidarity. The Prime Minister bluntly pointed out that the insufficient military aid is not just a matter of production. She stated that they currently have weapons, ammunition, and air defense systems, but they haven't immediately sent them to Ukraine. She was like a child in the fairy tale who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes, revealing the truth before all European leaders. When it comes to military aid for Ukraine, everyone has their own hidden agendas. It's not a matter of inability, but unwillingness. Europe and the United States, once intimate allies, now appear to be drifting apart, with their relationship growing increasingly distant. Europe feels that the U.S., once seen as a reliable big brother, is now unreliable and doesn't keep its promises. Initially, the U.S. pledged solemnly to protect Europe, but now it seems to be shrinking back, prioritizing its own interests. On the other hand, the U.S. feels that Europe, the supposed little brother, doesn't listen and is always dragging its feet. Despite Europe's economic downturn, it still wants to leech off the U.S. Why should hard-earned money be used to fill your holes? A British newspaper, The Times, aptly points out that NATO is in a dilemma. Relying on the U.S. Congress to allocate funds to support Ukraine is simply wishful thinking. If President Trump returns to power, NATO could be fundamentally changed. What will the future hold? No one can say for sure. But one thing is certain, the rift in U.S.-Europe relations will not be easily healed in the short term. As a result, the United States is shifting its focus to the Western Pacific. Plans are in place to deploy 5 aircraft carrier strike groups in the region, marking the most powerful concentration of U.S. naval forces in recent years. The scene is absolutely awe-inspiring. With 5 aircraft carriers and over 200 carrier-based aircraft, what's the purpose of this grand gesture? Currently, 3 aircraft carriers are already active in the Western Pacific: the USS Carl Vinson, USS Theodore Roosevelt, and USS Ronald Reagan. In early February, the USS Abraham Lincoln also left its home port in San Diego, California, heading towards the region. It's expected that the USS Washington will arrive in the Western Pacific in April. Additionally, there's the USS America Amphibious Assault Group, a super warship equipped with F-35B aircraft, boasting coastal combat capabilities comparable to aircraft carriers. With so many aircraft carriers and aircraft assembled, it's likely the United States has moved half of its naval might to the Western Pacific. Such a display of force would make even the Pacific Ocean tremble, let alone China. Various media outlets have been saying that the United States is flexing its muscles to warn China not to use force against Taiwan. This statement is not wrong, but the intentions of the United States are far more complex than that. It's clear to discerning observers that the United States is playing a divide-and-conquer strategy. By deploying aircraft carrier strike groups to the Western Pacific, it aims to exert pressure on Russia, forcing Russia to retract from the Ukrainian battlefield. In addition, the U.S. is also preparing for potential future conflicts. The Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, and the Korean Peninsula are all areas of paramount concern for the United States. Of course, the Americans have their own calculations. This year is a U.S. general election of the President and Congress. The Biden administration's display of military strength at this time is also aimed at garnering support for itself. After all, both parties in the U.S. have reached a consensus on taking a tough stance against China. Putin is truly in a dilemma this time. Russian military aircraft are crashing one after another in Ukraine, resulting in heavy losses. The only thing the Ukrainian military lacks now is F-16 fighter jets. With just 200 of them plus sufficient ammunition, they could sweep through the southern front and destroy the Russian artillery, radars, anti-aircraft missiles, and airports. Putin must be feeling the heat now. China's economy is not doing well, and the promised aid to Russia is not as substantial as before. If Russia continues to drag on in the Ukrainian battlefield, both its economy and military strength will suffer severe damage, potentially leading to political instability or even collapse. European countries have completely turned against Russia, cutting off energy and economic ties and imposing various sanctions on Russia. The U.S. is also not sitting idly, pulling strings in Central Asia and the Middle East to block Russia. Maintaining control over the occupied areas of Ukraine is becoming increasingly difficult. Indeed, Putin holds the ultimate trump card of nuclear weapons, but if they are used, it would mean total annihilation. Therefore, Putin must find a way to change tactics and end this war as soon as possible without playing himself to death. Hence, the Kremlin may be considering shrinking forces on the Ukrainian battlefield and focusing on other regions where geopolitical interests can be secured. This can be inferred by Medvedev's recent tough talk. He stated that if Russian forces are pushed back to the 1991 borders, Russia would engage in a full-scale nuclear war with the West. Not only would they be targeting Kyiv, but also launching nuclear bombs at Washington, Berlin, and London. While this statement sounds fierce, it suggests that Russia does not intend to return to the borders of 1991, implying that it might accept the borders of February 24, 2022, except for Crimea and Donbas. But upon closer analysis, this is merely wishful thinking from Putin's team. The Russian government has always been shameless. As long as Western countries exert enough pressure on them, making it impossible for them to save face, they might be willing to relinquish all occupied territories, but Ukraine must not push too hard and should leave Putin some face. If negotiations are conducted privately and diplomatic finesse is employed, Russia might still be open to compromise. Based on the above analysis, it can be inferred that Putin's team may be considering withdrawing troops from the Russian-occupied areas of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. With a retreat, Russia may shift its focus to the yet-to-be-initiated Western Pacific theater, namely the East Asia region. If Putin goes down this path, there are several options to consider. Firstly, Russia may consider directly seizing control of the 5 Central Asian countries. The U.S. is currently busy wooing these Central Asian nations. Even if they may not sway them towards the U.S. aims to ensure their neutrality. Therefore, Russia's strategy may not necessarily succeed. Secondly, Russia could drag China into the conflict. With Russia feeling pressured in Ukraine, it may seek to involve its ally China, anticipating that China has not yet become involved in the conflict. Russia's aim would be to divert attention and potentially instigate a conflict between China and the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, allowing Russia to address its own challenges separately. Of course, Russia may also decide to improve relations with the U.S. and play a subservient role in the Indo-Pacific region, reminiscent of the 1900 intervention of the 8-nation alliance in China. Back then, the U.S., Japan, Britain, Russia, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy intervened militarily in China under the pretext of protecting their citizens. ultimately leading to significant financial losses for China and the loss of territory. If Russia were to pursue a similar course of action, it would mark a significant reversal of the current situation. Therefore, from any perspective, it is imperative for the U.S. to deploy heavy military presence in the strategic Western Pacific region, the scene of potential conflict and competition among major powers.